They are dealing with it in a piecemeal approach, right? Where they have this person rise up to be Captain America, and this person rise up to be Hawkeye, and this person rise up to be the new Black Widow. All of these characters are coming up as a new instance of that on a piecemeal basis rather than having this blank slate they would have created with Infinity War, where they had these new characters who are all gone in an instant, and they have to grapple with that fact and step forward into that reality, trying to deal with the future as it is, right? Rather than going back to this instance of what was. And Marvel's reaction was nah, we like all these characters too much. We can make some good money if we just bring these characters back to life. I know what we're gonna do. Time travel.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us our two co-hosts, Avalon and Andrew, to review the fourth and final installment in the Avengers series arcs, right? We are dealing with Avengers Endgame today. This film was, the screenplay was by Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, who we've heard from in the past. And of course, it is directed by the Russo brothers, Anthony and Joe, giving us the completion to the Avengers arc as a whole, and specifically to the Thanos storyline that we have seen in these last two films. So, getting right into those initial impressions as we always love to do. Andrew, what is your thoughts and rating for Avengers Endgame?
I think this is a film that we watched with rose-colored glasses when we first went to the theaters. And looking back on it, I think there are a lot of signs of the poor quality to come that we just couldn't recognize in the moment.
Okay, there you go. And what was that final rating you gave it based on that impression?
Final rating was a 6.3.
Okay. So, even with that, that's not too bad for a rating. That being said, you gave the last one a pretty stellar review, so this one is much further down on the rating than that. So, if that is an indication of anything, you still have some serious beef with it. But, Avalon, before we get into that beef, what are your impressions and rating for this film?
This was definitely a unique movie that, you can't really say there's too many movies out there that have this kind of finale. With that being said, there's several things they did right that could have been amazing if they followed through on those things, but they didn't, and the movie I think suffers as a whole because of it. I wanted to like this again. I loved this movie when it first came out of theaters, but watching it now, I just came away disappointed. So, my review is a little better than last time. I gotta give it a 4.4. That's just for,
Okay.
but that's just for my review of Endgame on its own. Because I'm sure Andrew's going to bring that up again. For if you're going to talk about the complete story arc of character arcs of the Avengers specifically, I gave it a 7.05 for the entire storyline that we see, character arcs coming across all four movies and some other side movies as well. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, if you, especially, we've had multiple conversations in this podcast about what if this had been a TV show versus being a movie series, right? And how that, in some ways, might give you a different impression for how the storyline progresses and things like that, right? Obviously, TV shows are much less rigorous in regards to the completion of an arc within the single framework we have of a 2-hour film or 2.5-hour film, right? And so, in this case, it's kind of taking all of those pieces that they've developed over the course of 8 hours and put them into a final piece, which we now know as Avengers Endgame, and completes it into a 10-hour long storyline. So that's definitely fair. I think that because I did keep those other ideas in mind when I was just reviewing this final one, I think a lot of the things that Andrew said for the benefit of the last film actually carried into my liking of this film specifically. So I don't know that my rating is stellar, right? Once again, coincidence, I don't know why, but I ended up coming between both of you guys, giving it a 5.4. So, we're right in the middle of you guys, but I think that there was some things in this one that I went, you know what? What Andrew said before had some merit, and I think that it actually fully develops itself in this film. But that being said, um, there was still some things that were lacking in this film, and we'll get into that today. So it's by no means the greatest film out there,
Mhm.
but I actually really enjoyed it watching it again, and I think that there is honestly, some things in this that I didn't catch before. So I'm excited to get into that today. If you're curious as well, keep listening because we will get into those for sure. But before we do, if you have not watched it for some reason, why are you listening to the fourth installment of this? And like I mean, I'm glad you're that invested, but we'll get into the summary. Andrew, go ahead to give us what Avengers Endgame is all about.
Avengers Endgame is the culmination of the entirety of the MCU from phases 1 through 3. It follows the narrative of the original 6 Avengers who happened to survive the snap and follows their journey post the blip, as it ends up being called, which is Thanos wiping out half of life in the universe, and how they're going to live with themselves after this catastrophe. They end up discovering time travel through the aid of Ant-Man, who they had a whole movie about that, Ant-Man and the Wasp and the quantum realm. They use time travel, go back in time to get the stones, and then they come back to snap all of life back into existence.
Cool. There you go. That is the summary of this film. It's all about time travel. Woohoo! We all know how much awesomeness comes with that. So, yeah, we'll for sure get into that, I'm sure. But as always, we want to start off with that opening scene. We always talk about how can they get the people who are watching intrigued from the start and say, is this something we want to continue watching, or would we just walk out of the theater? Andrew, what are your thoughts on that opening scene? Do you think it's compelling when they talk about all these people and the great loss they've experienced since those that first detrimental instrumental action that Thanos does? Half of the people are wiped out, and they're all reeling from this, even coming to the point where they kill Thanos and realize they can't reverse everything, and then this continue to live their lives as it was in the next 5 years. What are your thoughts?
So I see the opener as having 2 parts because they all take place relatively quickly. You have Hawkeye and his family, and then you have the Avengers fighting Thanos. I think the opener does a really good job of setting up one specific character for this movie, and that's Thor. And he doesn't say much. You have like one scene, a couple like shots of him. You have his interactions with Captain Marvel, and then you have him cutting off Thanos' head without hesitation, and then just the scene ends with him walking away. Um, I think, despite not liking that Thor all that much because he's not as epic and goated as he is in other movies, I think this movie probably does the most work for developing him as a character and bringing his arc to what could have been an end. Um, and then I think it also does a good job, right? Because the opening scene is a little drawn out. You get like Iron Man coming back. You have Iron Man's message to Pepper he records. You have his confrontation with Captain America. All of that, I think, also does a really good job of setting up Iron Man for this movie. You have his motivations and fears just raw and exposed in this scene when he's just venting at Captain America. So I think Iron Man and Thor are done really well in this opener. And I think Hawkeye too. I think they do a good job of addressing the fact that he was absent in Infinity War, which they only mention he's like retired, basically. He's like on house arrest, similar to how Ant-Man is in Ant-Man and the Wasp. And last time we saw him was in Civil War, but the last time we saw his character really like developed and given background was with his family. And it was established his family is a major motivator as well as like what's the word I'm looking for? It's like this foundation for him almost. And so taking that away also sets up Hawkeye's character really well. Not to jump the gun, I think they do botch this pretty bad as the movie progresses. But I think that the setup for Hawkeye's character is done well. So Hawkeye, Iron Man, and Thor, I think, really stood out in that opening sequences. Overall, I give it a like, I say it's like a 4.4 out of 0.5 or something. I don't know what that would break down to in percentages, an 80%. So,
Yeah. Avalon, what did you think?
I think the opening is fairly strong on this movie because, I mean, in some ways, the scene with Hawkeye is almost like you'd see out of a horror story where it's like he's like in the middle of like family time, like hanging out with his family while under house arrest, kind of happy, and then people just disappear, just no explanation, nothing. It's just like they're gone, and it's like just sudden and just so subtle enough. It's just like unnerving when it happens. Um, I would say the opening does a good job setting up uh the six major Avenger. I mean, okay, five of the six major Avengers of the original six, because I kind of see the story kind of takes a page out of the first Avengers book, where the struggle is kind of about all of them again. Um, where it's like they're all reeling from the failure of Infinity War, and they're all trying, and they're all coping with it in different ways. And how do they bounce back from that failure? Because it's like, I mean, they're all doing different things, and it's like, but it's like like the confrontation with Thanos is like the rush, like to try to fix things really quickly, only to find out they still failed because the Infinity Stones are gone. So it's a great kind of opening start for the rest of the story to happen, and showing the characters like fast forward 5 years, showing how those events shaped them ultimately. So.
Yeah. And you see that they're even in these opening scenes coalescing around similar themes that they've discussed earlier on in the films, where they talk about being a team and working together. And you see that with the conflict, especially between Iron Man and Captain America, which it should be noted that basically at this point in the storyline, right, the only the last interactions that Iron Man and Captain America have had was in Civil War, where they were literally butting heads about everything that was going on. And from there, you have Avengers, Infinity War, where Iron Man is almost about to call Captain America and say, "Hey, we need your help," and he doesn't end up doing that. Who does end up doing that? It ends up being Bruce Banner, right, and trying to bring him into the conflict. So Captain America gets involved, but on the other side of the conflict. And so they are not a cohesive group. They are separated as they both try to deal with Thanos and his minions in their own way. And that comes to a head in this film, where you see Iron Man and Captain America having that conversation very early on. And Captain America is sitting there listening to Iron Man as Iron Man is pissed out of his mind. And he says, "You weren't there when we needed you. We were not a team. We were not successful, and we failed because you were not where you needed to be in that moment," right? And is there a good explanation for that? Is there a good reason for that? Based off of the previous film, yes, there is, right? Captain America was fighting his own war at the same time, trying to stop Thanos in this other realm, while Iron Man was trying to fight him physically on uh, Thanos' own planet. So there was reason for that, but in Iron Man's eyes, it's like, if we had worked together, maybe we could have stopped this. And because you weren't there, we were not able to. And so that really like brings some of those themes that we were talking about in the first film and somewhat in the second film together to this third film, or this fourth film, where they say, "You weren't there last time, and that's the reason why we failed." So even from the start, they're adding those instruments to be a forefront picture for us as the audiences. So I thought it was, as an opener, actually very good. They really try hard to lean into like the pain that all of the characters are feeling in their own way, right? Whether it's Hawkeye going on an absolute rampage, right? Or Thor receding into his own gluttonous, drunken debauchery, right? Or you see Tony Stark basically saying, "I'm out, screw all of this, it doesn't work, I can't do anything, Thanos wins," right? All of them are dealing with this in their own way, and they're all really not coping in a healthy manner. So I thought that it was really good at reestablishing the characters from a place of hurt and showing us a baseline to go from that has opportunity for all the characters to grow, and also for showing us, oh, what's going to happen from this great loss that they've just experienced, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, curious also about the main characters. As always with these team up movies, we have to ask the question, who's the main character and are they compelling? What are your thoughts, Avalon? Do you think who is the main character? And are they?
Um, well, when I was like looking at the story, looking at the characters, I would agree that Tony Stark, Black Widow, and Clint Barton and Thor kind of all play fairly central roles in the storyline, as well as Steve Rogers and kind of Ant-Man as well. So, I mean, I would say they're pretty much essential characters. I guess Bruce Banner, but I don't. But yeah, I mean, the thing about Bruce Banner in this movie is he's the least compelling character to follow as far as central characters.
Mhm.
Again, so he's the only one of the six who doesn't really have a like character arc in this movie. He kind of starts out okay. I mean, he's there, but it's like he heals really fast after the events of the 5 years, and he's Professor Hulk now. He's fine, and the rest of the movie he's just there helping things out. So, Ant-Man
Sure, and
doesn't.
maybe it'd be worth going each of these characters in turn just to give them a
Okay,
full
yeah.
fleshed analysis.
Mhm,
Um, I do think Bruce Banner is an interesting thought process just because
mhm,
of all of the characters in this film. 100%, he is the most grounded of them,
mhm.
right? At this point
Yeah.
in the film, which is interesting because the last time we saw him in like an Avengers film, if you will, uh, things were kind of a disaster, and like the last few episodes, if anything, of his experiences have been him basically just running away, not being able to cope with his issues and having problems along the way. And so he has this really interesting, like, off screen development where he basically makes peace with everything that has happened to him, finds a way to cope with the two sides of him and brings them together so that he doesn't really have a cohesive internal conflict, if you will, for us as audiences, which is kind of interesting and also somewhat convenient for the sake of the plot. But from a development standpoint, from an interesting character standpoint, I think that it leaves a lot lacking. Now, you
Mhm,
could say this movie is 3 hours long, so they couldn't do that for every character. But
mhm.
that also means that Bruce Banner doesn't have anything going for him specifically as a character in this film, if unless you disagree.
I would just say Edward Norton would have played it better.
Even though the movie isn't that great, I
Mhm.
think he plays a better Banner and a better Hulk. So
Actually, I would have loved to see Edward Norton tackling the idea of being Professor Hulk. I would have liked to see how he would have taken that.
true, Mark Ruffalo does have a much more Professor Hulk face. So
Anyways, do you have further thoughts, Andrew, on the Incredible Hulk in this film? Other than yes, he sucked.
okay, I have a lot of thoughts about where this movie goes wrong and what I think they how I think they fumbled the ball and how they could have made it better. But I do want to save those for the end so we can at least get through the movie itself. I will just say wasn't a fan of the Professor Hulk thing. It felt very uh when I was watching the movie and it first came out, my initial thought was, oh, the Hulk was just too powerful at this point. We just need to neuter him now and make it so that he isn't that strong. And let's do the same thing for Thor too until the very end. Um, and it's like Hulk is at this point in the MCU, he could have developed his powers to an extent where he is incredibly powerful. I mean, he already is in the first Avengers movie. And so, like, you have the fact that Thanos seems to scale insanely by this movie, even without the stones, and can just take on the Avengers all in his lovely lonesome self. And so the power scaling in this movie felt weird, and I think that also, just for myself, was reflected in the way that they treated Hulk.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a sense in which you feel, even though Professor Hulk it's kind of interesting because if you look at the size ratios, he's probably pretty similar, but you at least get the impression that Professor Hulk is weaker, maybe to some degree, compared to the other version of him. And maybe it's because he's not willing to just destroy everything that comes into his path. I'm not sure. But at the very least, in comparison then to Thanos, who he does try to 1v1 in the previous film, he seems even worse at that in this one than in the previous one. So
Well, I mean, I'm
there's
not a
definitely something to
huge
be said there.
Hulk comic book fan. I don't find him all that interesting. But even what little knowledge I have, uh, Hulk has to be angry in order to be more powerful, and the more angry he is, the stronger he gets. So by literally making him not angry, you are taking away his superpower and just making him the big friendly green guy. So
Yeah, for sure.
I also don't really know what he adds to the film as a character aside from his power scaling. Um,
Hmm.
he functions more as a plot device in my eyes. Like a lot of what he does could be
Yep.
done by
Yep.
someone else.
Yes.
And the one instance where they try to trick you into thinking that he's necessary is when he snaps his fingers. But I'm pretty sure Thor could have handled it, and they were just like, no, 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 let Hulk do it. You're drunk. But it's like they just wanted to give Hulk something important to do. Um, and I don't know. I just was not impressed with Hulk's character. I think as the movies go on, his character actually just gets worse and worse. So
Yeah, for sure. What are your thoughts on? I know you had six people lined up in that group of people you thought were the main characters in this film. Avalon, why don't you tackle the second one on your list? What are your thoughts?
Well, technically I had 7, but I mean, I'm just gonna go with the one that also didn't have a whole lot of character development per se. They just are there for the sake of the story and the overarching character arcs of the MCU. And that's Ant-Man, Scott Lang. Because I feel like he plays a central enough role in the storyline that he could be classified a main character this time around. But he doesn't really have a character arc from beginning to end. He's more there because he has familiarity with the quantum realm, and because of his like being trapped there for the time he is, it gives an explanation for how they discover time travel. And so he's more or less just used for that purpose. Um, I mean, he's not like a boring character, but he's not like a compelling character. Of like all the characters go through character arcs in the story. In my book, he's still like he's not as bad as Hulk. He's better, but he's still not like other characters' stories were more interesting in this film besides his. So
Yeah, actually, before I say anything, Andrew, I am curious what your thoughts are on Ant-Man because he is definitely unique. He doesn't really show up in the previous film, and he did show up in Civil War, and so he has these weird cameos where he just shows up randomly and has an impact. And this one, he definitely has an impact. Do you think he's compelling as a primary character in this film?
I would probably say I don't view him as a primary character. I think even in this Avengers movie, even though he has a decent amount of screen time, I see the screen time as more of a he's essential as a plot device because of the time travel that they end up utilizing in this film, and so they have to have him there. I don't know that that means he is a primary character in my mind. Primary characters in my mind are number one, Iron Man. I think that not only in the Avengers films, but I think the greater MCU, Iron Man is the main protagonist for phases 1 through 3. And then I think secondarily in this film, you have characters like Thor and arguably Black Widow are more play the protagonist role. Um, so I didn't expect that much from Ant-Man. I don't think he's that compelling as a character, and I think if you buy the idea that he is a primary character, then yeah, you're definitely going to be disappointed in what he brings to the table.
For sure. I mean, I think kind of going back to what you were just saying about the Incredible Hulk, you get the impression that he is there primarily for the big plot device in this film, which is newsflash. You can time travel now. And we're going to have a whole thing on time travel, I'm sure, later in this podcast. We're going to save that for dealing with the development of the plot, because I think that that's really where it deserves its own discussion. But in regards to Ant-Man as his own character and whether or not he's compelling, you started it off right, I think, in regards to how he has this deal with Cassie, his daughter, who ends up becoming older in the process of him being gone. And I thought that was actually pretty good. You know, it was kind of interesting to see him wrestle with that and be happy to see her. Also seeing that his love interest is gone and all these other things. So there was motive for him being there. Uh, at the same time, of all of the characters, Ant-Man has always seemed more on the comedic side more than anything else, right? kind of similar to Guardians of the Galaxy, except Guardians of the Galaxy has enough like seriousness intermingled with other characters such as Gamora, right, or Nebula, who are inherently serious, so that it helps kind of ground it in the reality of what's going on versus the more happy-go-lucky aspect of Star-Lord or the snarky aspect of why am I forgetting the rodent's name right now? But
Rocket.
anyways, yeah, Rocket, like, like they help create some level of balance, if you will, between the characters and also some of the other side elements that make it more comedic, such as the music, are inherent to Guardians of the Galaxy's storytelling, right? Versus with Ant-Man, he's always seemed more comedic, like oh, I don't know what the heck is going on, and I just have this superpower, and I'm going to do my thing in the midst of all this chaos that's going on, right? And even the side characters in his stories have continued to exacerbate that mentality, right? You talk about his Mexican friend who owns the truck that ends up being critical to this film, and how all of this is going on, and he's a super funny character too. So from the start, the fact that they take the super funny character and bring him in as like a quote unquote main character in this film is it's not surprising that he gets side punted in some ways to being like, yeah, you're still the funny guy, whatevs. You just happen to add this critical component of time travel with your character. So it felt very much like a mechanism for where they wanted it to go than necessarily uh, critical to the storyline itself. Maybe that's being harsh because I think that like time travel is just like, dude, if you're going to go down the time travel path, you got to really know what you're freaking talking about. And I just don't think well, we'll get to time travel, but yeah, I don't think it worked out how it needs to. Anyways, any more thoughts on Scott Lang, or should we move on to the next character?
Let's just move on.
Cool. Then
Unless
I'm gonna keep going, Avalon. I'm gonna keep coming back to you on the characters because I think this is a good segue.
yeah, I was gonna go with Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow next. Because I think hers is a little bit more subtle and more interesting because she becomes a workaholic essentially after the snap and after failing to stop Thanos. Like she's working overtime to keep the Avengers running and together. More or less like coordinating with everyone, keeping everything going. And she doesn't have a life outside the Avengers now because now she's protecting the world full time with what
Hmm.
resources she has. And it's like and in a way, it's her way of coping with what happened, how they failed. Like she continues to be the hero in a way, doing what she can, even though you can tell she's broken and still struggling with what's happened, the fallout.
For sure. Did you think that was a intriguing baseline for her character, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a ton to add to that. I did like her character in this film. I think they do her better than other films she shows up in, much better than the Black Widow film. Um, which also, in the greater conversation of the MCU leading up to this point, I probably wouldn't even include that film because it was more like a retroactive, let's give us more screen time with Black Widow in it. And so there was no real way
Right.
for them to implement anything that happened that was impactful in that film in this one. Um, so I think her character's good. I don't think she was very compelling in Infinity War, but she definitely got to take the spotlight here, especially with her death. Spoiler, becoming Gamora 2.0.
For sure. And it's definitely one of those times where of all of the stories where they try to actually deal with loss, they put it all on this one. So, here you go with starting off with Black Widow having her own sacrificial moment. And I mean, I'm sure we'll get to that, right? But I think just inherently with her character, it is interesting. I appreciated how they had that have that scene go down, where it wasn't as if both these characters have been working from the start, and they developed this from the first Avengers film, where there's this intricate relationship of protectiveness around both Black Widow and Hawkeye, where they see each other as bonded in this situation, right? They both care for each other deeply. They don't want to see each other die. They of all of the characters in the rest of the Avengers, they want to stay together as the duo, right? And so the fact that both of them are dealt with the situation of making the sacrifice to obtain the Soul Stone, it was interesting. And they both wanted to give up themselves for the sake of the other, so the other could live and find that fulfillment in their future life by having all of the people they cared about come back and have everything back to normal like they wanted. So I appreciated that. I thought that of all of the scenes that are lacking in this film, that was not necessarily one of them. And I appreciated how they developed that out. I don't know if you guys have more thoughts on that.
I think her death is probably the strongest scene for her, and I think you're already echoing this. I think it is for a lot of reasons, though, because it functions as the culmination of her arc in an almost symbolic way. Because her whole bit, hers and Hawkeye's bit, is that they are men amongst gods. They don't have fancy suits of armor or godlike powers or even super soldier powers. With Black Widow, it's echoed multiple times throughout the MCU that she feels this guilt for the things that she's done. For the Red Room, she says that her ledger is dripping, gushing with blood. She also echoes this idea that she doesn't have choice or agency. And she does this in Winter Soldier when she's talking to Captain America and how she was just a pawn. So the idea is behind her death, right, is this idea of redemption. She ends up ultimately giving her life to save the world. And in her mind, this is the ultimate way to pay off this ledger she has, this guilt that she's been carrying around. Secondly, it's a choice that she makes all on her own. It's something she is finally able to decide for herself. And then third, I think it is really cool that her death is contrasted with Tony's in my mind, because hers is silent. Nobody sees it. Only the Avengers know about it. Whereas Iron Man's is heard across the world, right? Black Widow is this person that has worked with the Avengers, not nearly as famous. She's an assassin, and she has this silent death. And I think I would argue there's a theme in this film about heroism and different types of heroism. And I think that Iron Man's is a much more glamorous one, albeit his arc was not so much about the way he died, so much as the fact that he had it. Or not, sorry, no, not about the way he died. It's not about the recognition he receives or the sound that it makes, so much as the fact that he's willing to sacrifice himself. That's the message in his death. I think the message in her death is that there are plenty of heroes that will die and never be recognized for the sacrifices they paid.
He also contrasts with the death in Infinity War, whereas Thanos, like, literally kills his daughter to get the Soul Stone. She gives her own life so that Clint can get the Soul Stone. It's not like killing someone else; it's sacrificing yourself to give it to to save others.
Yeah.
So,
and it's
Right.
also interesting too, because in like the ideas behind like the psychology of man, right? There are very few men who would willingly give up their own life. I say men, I mean people in general. There are very few humans who would do so. In order for someone to willingly sacrifice themselves or put their life on the line, or in her instance, she knows it means death, there has to be some stronger motivator there. And so it is also compelling in the sense that she cares so much about the Avengers and the rest of humanity that she's willing to kill herself. So yeah, I think the scene is good.
I'd also like to add one other thing, because I mean, this is also going to start to bleed into Clint Barton's character, is because Clint Barton, uh, after the snap, he falls into this, like, he becomes a murderer. Like, he becomes what Black Widow was before she joined Shield, and he knows it, and he sees all the pain he's caused, all the destruction, and he knows that he deserves, like, he's riddled with the guilt of what he's done in pursuit of easing the pain of what he's experienced. And it's just become this cyclical cycle for him, where he's just continuously killing and hunting to assuage, to calm his own guilt, only he adds more to it. So in a way, his offer to kill himself, to sacrifice himself to get the Soul Stone, is kind of like also like looking for release from the guilt that he's gone through, and so he doesn't have to face his family after what he's done. But Black Widow sees that and refuses to let him do it because she sees what, like, cause she's been there and she knows why he's doing it. It's like she refuses to let him kill himself in this manner. So,
Well, it's almost like a
Yes.
selfish act that he's trying to do because he doesn't want
yes,
to face the consequences of his actions. But it's not
Mm.
just that. Black Widow is looking at this as your kids deserve to grow up with a father. I
Mm.
don't. That's why she said, I have no one.
Mm.
No one's going to miss me if I die, which isn't necessarily true because there's the Avengers. But in her mind, she doesn't have a blood family left to go back to, which then becomes ironic when you consider the events of the Black Widow movie. But we're going to ignore that because it hadn't come out yet. Um, so I do think, right, that it does tie in well with Hawkeye's character. So
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's key because there is ulterior motives to Clint Barton's character dealing with this issue, right? And it's interesting because they both are trying to do the same action, and in some ways they have a similar background to why they would want to do that, right? Both of them have done terrible things, but there is also a sense in which uh, Black Widow has gone further along that path than Clint Barton has, and whereas the one is trying to escape having to deal with the consequences of his actions, and the other side, she sees this as both the most reasonable thing to do based off of how Clint Barton has more responsibilities in his life that he must go back to. And also for herself, she does see this as the culmination of trying to fulfill obligations she sees or debts that she sees in her ledger without necessarily coming from like a I want to escape my past, more so I want to fulfill my past, which is kind of nuanced, but kind of an interesting way to go about dealing with those individual struggles. Anyways, Alan, you want to go on with Clint Barton at this point, since I think that he's interrelated, and we've already discussed him just briefly.
yeah. I mean, that's not really. I mean, I kind of covered most of what I already had on him. I mean, his character arc is one of guilt and like he's known he's done terrible things, and he's just motivated by that guilt. In some ways, he sees it as making amends, but in the process of making amends, he just does more terrible things. Just it's the whole thing of like someone who's caught in addiction or something, where it's like you're just adding to the guilt and shame, and just like and it makes this unbreakable cycle where it's like he's like telling himself he's doing good, but he's also recognizes he's doing awful things. So he has a great character arc in the story. He has a great motivation for being involved. Um, so I mean, that's really all of it I really had to say about Clint Barton. So I covered most of what I had, so I'm ready to move on to someone else if you want.
Sure. Just brief. I don't know if you had anything to add on Clint before we move on to let's just move on to Thor. I think is appropriate next.
Hawkeye's transformation makes sense.
Mhm.
I personally I didn't think they did a good job of portraying the Hawkeye pre Natasha's death, though. I think he comes across as almost too lighthearted, and not to sound like cliche, but not dark and brooding enough. Like he's giving just normal Hawkeye, and then even on their little plane ride to Vormir, he's joking, he's laughing, and it's like he's serious in the scene when you first see him, and he tells Black Widow, "Don't give me hope," and that scene's good. But between that scene and Natasha's death, I don't find him compelling in the when you take into account where he is at that point in the story. And then right after she dies, I find his transformation makes total sense. But those are my thoughts on Hawkeye. Aside from that portion in between, I think the idea of his character arc is pretty good.
Sure, and I don't know that it's developed a ton to give super great nuance to his character, but to maybe play the devil's advocate, the idea that he's with Black Widow, this person that he's known very well over the years and that he's come to trust, this idea that he has someone to continue to joke around with and continue to enjoy life in this pitiful existence that he has made some sense to me, so I didn't have a big issue with it. even if he has these underlying issues that he hasn't yet come to terms with in his existence. And maybe it's also because he has some hope that he might actually be able to see his family and bring back the past that he so earnestly yearns for, if you will.
Sure. I mean, I guess in my mind, he's just there. They do really well in certain scenes in this film with communicating a lot in so short a time span. And with the scenes that we see Hawkeye, I just don't see that grief and pain. It's like it's all consuming for him at the beginning of the film. And it's like that all consuming anguish that he's living through just kind of ceases to exist for the rest of the film. Also, by the way, as a side note, I find it very interesting and lame that they both get set on this planet and Nebula knows, like, presumably how it works, or at least should have some sort of inkling and says nothing.
You mean, oh, the Soul Stone?
Yeah.
Well, it's not clear actually that anyone knows how it works
The
until
only person who
Thanos
came away
goes there.
from Vormir was Thanos. She
Yes.
just knows Gamora died on Vormir. She doesn't know how Gamora died.
I feel like that's at least have been mentioned. I get like them not knowing exactly the fact that like one of them has to die, but like you sent the two weakest Avengers to this complete unknown, and like thematically it works. It's just like strategically, I don't find.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna go off of characters, discuss that. That's the one part of the movie that does kind of like the whole going back in time and like the splitting up of the teams. You could argue like, wait, why did they send that person there? Why did they send this person there? Like thematically, it's like, wait. I mean, obviously, according to the rules, they only had one set of pin particles per person, so they can only send 3 teams. So they had to pick and choose who they sent where. But well, some of them make sense, like Thor to Asgard and Tony and Captain America to 2012 New York. Like some of them make absolute sense where they go. It's harder to say, well, why did Rocket go to Asgard? Why did Nebula not go to Vormir? And why did she on whatever the planet is where the Power Stone was? It's just like you could go back and forth on some of these characters. Like, well, why? And it's like, and sometimes it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. It's just like, don't want to say random, but it was just like, we just want this person to go with this person here, or this person to go with this person here. So,
Well, yeah, I think my point wasn't that it was necessarily bad. It's that I think they're doing it for the thematic elements that will come about as a result of putting these specific characters together.
well, yes, because that was their character arcs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
and I see what you're saying, and I think this is honestly one of those situations where a single line of dialogue from one or two characters would have solved this problem, right? It wasn't necessarily a big issue per se, but it's more so a question of this doesn't really make sense without at least some justification for why they specifically are there. So it would have been nice to have that, and it would have added at most for the characters that we do have question for 30 seconds to the entire film. Right. So why didn't they do that? Not entirely clear. What are your guys' thoughts on Thor, though? Alan, if you want to start, feel free.
As again, like I think Thor has a great start to this movie. After all, he fails at the beginning, and probably visibly so. Like he's the one who actually kills Thanos. In some ways, he fails twice because he failed to stop Thanos before he snapped his fingers, and then they failed again to get the Infinity Stones before and bring everyone back. So him killing Thanos in that moment makes sense for his character. It's like almost like a moment of rage and anger. And then he falls into this debaucherous state. Yeah, he has a great start to his character, I think, because it's like it makes sense for what has happened, why he's where he's at. Where they take his character in the movie, that's just one character arc. I just hated how it ended. Because it's like there was a clear direction they should have gone with this character, and it would have been super great if that's where they went with it. But instead, they wanted to do things with this character, I guess, post Endgame, and do other things with this character. It's like that just screwed with the story of his character, and it just made it bad. And just like,
Sure. Well, you want to spell that out a little bit more?
Okay.
Like, what do you think?
I don't know how far over the story we want to go to, but okay. So like, So like if I was handling this movie, if I wanted to give his character a perfect arc, like because he is the king of the Asgardians at the beginning of this film because of Thor Ragnarok. He loses half his people and like he fails twice. Like he's in this state. If he had gone back in time in this whole conversation with his mom, like if he had like coming back, like half because of that conversation and then the struggle with Thanos, like he decides to do better and to actually take up the reins of being king and actually take care of his people and actually accept the responsibility fully this time after he's gone through, that would have been a much more compelling character arc, much more compelling story. That is what we should have seen. But clearly, Marvel wanted to see him go join the Guardians of the Galaxy for whatever reason. And I like the Guardians of the Galaxy, but there was no point for that. And it just was like, it was almost like him shirking responsibility. It was him like, yeah, I'm gonna do my own thing now. I'm not gonna care about my people anymore. I'm just gonna do whatever. And it's just like it didn't make sense in light of everything that's gone on. And Mike's just not happy with it.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And if you want to keep in mind, like Thor's arc in the first film, you're talking about a character who initially, right, he really struggled with the throne, right, and what it means to lead his people. And you have this first one where he has the struggle of being the leader of Asgard. He wants it, but for the wrong reasons. And then at the end of the day, he ends up realizing this isn't necessarily the path that he should be taking, right? That he should be the one who is actually doing this responsibly, if you will, and to keeping in mind the good of others rather than his own glory and benefit in the process of this. And so he ends up in some ways pushing back his responsibility for the throne, and then fully, as time progresses, taking on that responsibility to a fuller and fuller extent until this last one where he is in some ways, in Ragnarok at least, accepting that responsibility to some degree as he shepherds the refugees away from right. And so you could even have a broader implication of what it mean to be responsible beyond his own people to the universe in general and all these other things. And instead, what he goes to is a reversion back to his original goal in the first one, saying, "No, I don't want the throne. I don't want any of this. I'm not worthy of it. Give it to someone else. I'm just going to go off and do my own thing," right? Basically says, "I'm going to be a bachelor again and do whatever the heck bachelors do and just chill out with the boys instead of actually, holding on to the responsibility that's been thrust upon him." And so, in many ways, it does short circuit the storyline he's been going through this entire time. So, yeah, I 100% agree that his initial start in this film, if anything, I think it's one of the most compelling instances of Thor that we have. He starts off with this idea that he is at the absolute dregs of life, that he hates where he's at. He's coping in so many different ways, and him having to face the reality of what's going on and that interaction with his mother and all these other things is forcing him to understand where he needs to be as a leader of his people. And the fact that at the end he just goes, "Nah, how about this? Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm here, it's your boy," and goes off with them is in some ways saying, okay, what? How is this fulfilling for his character or in any ways meaningful for a man who's called upon to lead the people of Asgard? So, anyways, Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Thor was almost at the top.
I will say, as a side, like Andrew, in credence to things you have said in the past, right? I did not consider Thor a main character in any of the previous films. In this one, I definitely did, just because of how much they focused on him, especially leading into his character. So the fact that they dropped the ball so hard at the end is, in fact, very disappointing, considering how much screen time and effort they put into him in this film.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I remember watching this film and being a little disappointed with Thor, as he's become known as. Rewatching it, I was like, honestly, this is, as much as he isn't like cool and awesome in this film, that's the point. He is the cool, awesome person who has hit rock bottom. In the last film, he said, "I've lost everything. What do I have left? Myself. I am insanely powerful and I will avenge them. That's the one thing I have left." And he loses that. Everything he does is for naught. And it's so good because he's this drunk, pathetic slob who doesn't know what to do with himself, gets absolutely slapped across the face by his own mother, who he knows is going to die that day when he goes back. And it's just like, what do I do with my life? I'm such a complete waste of life. I have there's so many people that depend on me, that need me, and I was meant for greater things than this. And then at the end of the film, he goes, "You know what that greater thing is? Oil farming on the Guardians of the Galaxy ship." And that's it. Like,
Yeah.
I agree with Avalon, and I'm going to go a little bit more on this. Not a ton because this is a podcast about the movie, but we're going to talk a lot about the impact this film has, and I think that is probably going to be one of the main focus points for myself in this review. Thor's character could have been so much going for him post Endgame. And I think the way that they handled him is tragic, and it's reflected in the films that follow, specifically Love and Thunder, is just the natural progression of this terrible ending they have for his character at the end of this film. You have what he should have done is he could have accepted this responsibility as King of the Asgardians. And what they could have done also is in his fight with Thanos, it could have cost him literally an arm and a leg. He's already missing an eye, which we kind of forget about because Rocket has a fake one for him. But I think a heavily battle damaged Thor who has accepted the responsibility of leading Asgard into a new era, rebuilding everything they've lost, taking on that responsibility as King of Asgard. But not only that, Asgard is seen as essentially the most powerful in the 9 realms. So rebuilding the pieces of not just Asgard, but the 9 realms as a whole could have made him an actually interesting character in following movies. We could have seen things like Rune King Thor. We could have seen things like Thor as a Herald of Galactus when he finally gets introduced later on down the road, because clearly they want to keep Thor, right? They get rid of a lot of the other Avengers. Thor is clearly one they're holding on to. And so there's a lot more you could do to develop his character as no longer just an Avenger, right? He moves on from that. We don't need him as an Avenger anymore. He could function as a galactic powerhouse, the King of Asgard, someone that is very powerful and functions in the MCU, and maybe we get a movie or two about, but he doesn't need to be in the limelight. We have other characters we can explore. But instead, we want to keep him in the limelight and have him be his own solo act, and we end up with a terrible movie. I think also another character who doesn't show up in this film, but I think is ruined by this arc is Lady Sif. She doesn't show up in Ragnarok. She ends up just becoming this almost like throwaway character in Thor: Love and Thunder. In the comics, she ends up becoming Queen of Asgard. I think that also could have been an interesting thing to play with. They've already set up that Jane Foster and him broke up. Okay, whatever. Forget her. We don't need her. I don't find her Jane Foster Thor comic that compelling anyways. And they completely botched it in the MCU. So I was really disappointed with Thor because I think that they actually, despite Dark World being pretty bad, and despite Ragnarok being a film made just to watch Thor and Hulk fight, there were key pieces that were put into play for Thor's arc over the greater MCU that was phases 1 through 3. And in Infinity War, we talked about this the last time. You guys said he doesn't change that much. I agree. He doesn't change a ton. Endgame is the second part of that arc. It is the part of the arc where he truly has hit rock bottom because he still has this blind optimism almost where it's like, even though I've lost everything, I can still fight my way out of this. And then he loses that. And the result of that is, okay, well, we beat Thanos. I'm just going to go chill and drink beer. So, yeah, I think of all of the characters in this film, Thor was the most disappointing for me because you have characters like Hulk and Ant-Man who don't have a ton of progression, but they do not have the same kind of startup that Thor does in this film. They don't have the same basis. And so you're literally just blueballing the audience by the end of the film because you've given them so much and then you just take it away. And yeah, anyways, I could go on about this, but
Well,
I think
yeah, it's like with Thor, Thor, like because of where he starts as an audience, we're given the most reason to see him change. Like we're given a lot of reason to want to see him to change, to be a better person. We want to see him like rise above this and become like regain the reins of his life, so to speak, and like take control. And at the end, it doesn't feel like he has taken control. It feels like he's just letting it all go instead. Where it's like, oh, I'm going to do something else instead. Mess up my life in some other way.
Close. He's right there, and he just goes,
yeah.
Well, you remember what I did in Thor: The Dark World? We're going to revert not 1, not 2, 3 movies to the character I was there, and we're going to go back to that. I mean, when I watched this I'm sitting there going, you know what this is? This is Return of the King. If Aragorn at the end of it went, nah, I'm good. Like you don't have the same screen time and development as you do with Aragorn, but functionally it's the same thing. You have the king that has returned and is so close to reclaiming and like taking over this his rightful place as king of his people, and then just going, I don't want it. Sorry, too much work. So
They turned him into like a Jack Sparrow-esque character. It was just like, I'm here to live on the high seas and chill it out, okay?
yeah, Thor is
Yes.
not Jack Sparrow. There's only one Jack Sparrow.
No. Not at all.
So,
So Avalon, go ahead with the next character on your list. Who
I'm
you
just gonna
thinking?
go with Captain. I'm gonna go with Steve Rogers next, just because we'll leave Tony for last.
Sure.
And I would say this movie, I mean, because we've had discussions in the past with especially the Captain America movies, about him being this like paragon of virtue, where it's like he doesn't really have so much of a character arc, and that's what makes him compelling, because he's like an idealist, where he stands for something. And even in the Avengers movies per se, he doesn't necessarily have a character arc in most of them, even though like he's still this idealistic character, and that brings him into conflict with other people because he's trying to do good. Though he does have like some changes where he's like in the first one where he has to work outside of a military framework with other people in a team setting. And so like I would argue that he does have something in sometimes, but it's not much. I'd say in this one, he has a little bit of a character arc where it's like, because all this whole time he is this like goal-oriented, action-oriented character who's leading others like, you need to like achieve your goal, like we need to win, we need to like work together to achieve some goal, or like the safety of others. Like he's always been about that up until this movie. While his fall, he doesn't have like a huge fall compared to everyone else, but he's still like trying to push for an optimism with everyone, whereas like he's trying to help others heal, but he is secretly not really healing himself. Like he failed as well, but he's like hide, and like he kind of acknowledges that he's like hurting and that he's like he also is dealing with it, but he's not really moving on either. He's like Natasha, like continuing in this mode of mind where it's like, I need to help others heal. Like I'm continuing to save the world in my own way, but I am like, so it's like he's ignoring his own like his own internal like pain and internal like the guilt and like what has happened. So, and actually, I would say I am conflicted a little bit about his ending, only because like it does kind of make sense for his character, because it's like going back in time, he suddenly realizes he has an opportunity to go back to what he lost and maybe like give up, like become like find a life outside of what he's been living for all this time. And because he's been this paragon, like because this whole time he's been this like almost a workaholic like Natasha, he's like, do I give this role up to like do something else, to have a family and such, which I think is an interesting thought process for his character. I'm still not completely sure if it was the right move for his character, but I mean, in some ways, like because of everything we've seen him go through, I mean, especially in terms of the whole MCU, it's like in some ways it does kind of feel deserved. Where it's like, okay, he's been through so much. When does he put the shield down and do something else, kind of thing? So, like, in terms of character arc, it actually kind of is satisfying, but it's also like, well, should he have actually done that? Like, I don't know, because it almost seems like a selfish move as well. So, like, I'm conflicted. To
Sure.
say the least, about
Well,
his character.
and let me just say, of all of the times, I actually think of all of the films that have Captain America in them, and I know I've been the one who's been on the other side for Captain America for all of these, and constantly harping on how he is a garbage character in comparison to the other characters in this film because he's too idealistic and all that stuff. I actually thought that this film did him very well, specifically for that reason. And some of this, honestly, has been played up not in this film, not in the previous film, but actually in the film of Age of Ultron. And it comes in that one line where Ultron hits him with the soldier who, never knows when to not fight a war, more or less, right? That you've always been fighting, and you're always in this constant state of fighting for America and fighting for this war, but you never know when to put the shield down, right? And so this is him having to deal with that and understanding, you know what? You're right. I have been basically distracting myself by constantly fighting that I don't actually know what's good for myself personally and when it's time to give it up and live a cohesive life in and of my own right, if you will, right? And being willing to see his own shortcomings or his own lifestyle that is devoid of this constant need to find fulfillment in his persona of being Captain America, right? And so, in that way, I actually really appreciated his character. And this is one of the few characters that I thought in this film was done phenomenally for that reason. That I think that his character, when it comes to that completion, has a full arc where he's like, one, he is struggling at the beginning, right? He is faced with this reality with Iron Man that even though he is this idealistic SOB, he wasn't there when he needed to be. And he wasn't able to stop these situations from coming about. And at the same time, he's given up so much and never gotten anything out of it. And he needs at some point to realize his shortcomings as a human being and face those and come to terms with what he needs to be a full person. And so, him going back in time, going back to his long lost love and finding fulfillment in that, was maybe somewhat cheesy, I will admit, but like I appreciated it, so I didn't have a big problem with it. Yeah.
Well, that's why it was somewhat satisfying. So,
right, exactly, and I think that between him and Iron Man, you definitely get some level of like nostalgia feel from them, where you're like, this all has been in some ways building up to this. So as much as it's taken like 6 or 8 movies to get here, here we are, and it's pretty nice, Anyways, Andrew, what are your thoughts?
I like Captain America in this film. I think he looks more goated with a beard, but that's besides the point. The line in Age of Ultron is Captain America starts his little spiel, which I think is important for the context. He goes like, "I know you've suffered," and Ultron just sets him up. He's like, "God's righteous man, pretending you could live without a war." And that is his charge to Captain America, essentially telling him, you are incapable of living a fulfilled life in a world that is not plagued with constant conflict. You have to have conflict to give yourself purpose. And so Captain America is finally coming to terms with this, and his action to stay back with Peggy Carter, even though time travel is used to do it, and we don't like time travel in this movie, his choice to do so is a fulfillment of his character actually growing and changing in this film, because he's learned to find fulfillment in something else. Because in all the other movies, you know why he always knows what to do and how to do it, and like he has his mind made up? Because all he thinks about is conflict. All he can think about is strategizing, what's my next move here? How am I going to lead this team? How am I going to win this next fight? That's his all-consuming thought. And so he's never even given a thought to other women. And you even get this in Winter Soldier too. At the beginning of the film, when Black Widow's talking to him, and she's like, "Did you ask this girl out? Did you ask this girl out?" And he says, "No, no, no." And she's like, "Too scared?" And he just goes, "Too busy." There are these little things that are dropped throughout the MCU that are hinting at the fact that Captain America, in order to feel fulfilled in his life, has to constantly be fighting a war. And you almost get that too. I didn't even think about this until watching this film, in that it's almost like he's wants conflict. If you look at the film, he always chooses the option that results in conflict. In Civil War, he knows that this is going to result in a fight with Iron Man, but he chooses it anyways. Even though he could probably find a way to talk Iron Man down and find another way around it, he chooses the path with conflict. I don't know if that was intentional. I just thought it was interesting. But yeah, I think his character does have a definitive arc in this film. And I think the fact that he does go and live a fulfilled life, even though it's like for most characters, you look at that and go, "Oh, that's the happy ending." For him, that wasn't the end goal for most of the MCU. His end goal was just to continually fight until his dying breath. And you even get that with his line, "I could do this all day." And you get that with him standing up to the entirety of Thanos' army with a broken shield and his arms like open and bleeding and just like ready to take on this army all by himself. And they don't like show a moment where he realizes this. You kind of pick that up by the end when he comes back as an old man. But I think probably some point in that battle, he realized like this is my life, is fighting, and is what is and I would say the theme for this film, I think, is essentially what gives your life purpose. And you get this with all multiple different characters. You get this with Thor, Black Widow, Hawkeye, Captain America, Iron Man. And I think for Captain America, his conclusion is the fight is not what gives my life purpose. I need to find fulfillment in something else.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a good place to end his character specifically. So let's move on to Iron Man. Alvin, what are your thoughts on Iron Man?
I mean, he is like clearly broken after losing directly to Thanos and seeing like several see Peter Parker die almost in his arms. And so I mean, he's like suffered and been like, and he also feels justified. Like he's been through so much over the course of movies and through his character. So him like lashing out as he does in front of Steve Rogers and to absolutely just like give up, like hand over his like arc reactor and just like, and then like he disappears for 5 years and he's like, he has a family life now. He's married. He has a daughter. He's like, he has a little house on the edge of a lake. And he's kind of got the happy family life that we didn't expect him to have, but he has it, and he's happy with where things are at now. Like he's like moved on in a way. So when they come back to him, it's like, hey, we have a way to fix things. He's like, no, I don't want to fix things because I'm happy with my life is. But as soon as they but as soon after they've left, it's like he's still thinking about it because he's still been affected by it. And so he can't stop thinking about, well, what if we did try to fix this? And then he figures out the solution to time travel. And he's like, well, now I can't let this go. Now I actually have to fix this because it's like something like he can't live knowing he could have saved other people. Like he could have maybe fixed how things happened. So his character arc is interesting because it's like he keeps meddling. He keeps working on things. So in a way, it's like even though he doesn't want to meddle, he doesn't actually want to give up what he's gained, and like he can't stop in a way, which makes sense for his character. And so I do think it's interesting. Like at the very end, it's like they've brought everyone back and they're fighting to stop Thanos from killing everyone, and it's like they're being like Thanos is slowly beating away through all of them, and then he has to realizes he has to make the choice where it's like no one can really wield the Infinity Gauntlet without like he realizes it will probably kill him, but he realizes he's the nearest person to do something about it and to save everyone. So in that moment, he makes this split decision that to put his life on the line and to stop Thanos. And he makes the ultimate sacrifice for everyone. It's like he essentially gives up his own life to save everyone. So,
yeah. Well, especially because you see he's developed throughout his own films in this idea of just becoming a character who is not just self-centered, but he also has this idea of feeling obligations for the people around him. And this plays into what you got in the earlier films where he's having these nightmares about the past. And this led to Ultron. This led to all these other things. And so in some ways, he is trying to shirk that responsibility from the start where he goes, listen, going back to the conflict between him and Captain America, he says, screw you. I actually had a plan to stop this, and I was working on this, and guess what? You messed it up. Even though it wasn't really Captain America, because Ultron was going to go rogue regardless, but like in his mind, he's like, I was doing what I could to try to solve this problem, and you are totally screwing it up from the start. And so now we're in the situation we are in today. I tried my best, and you totally botched it. So screw you. I actually have a life now, and you guys all don't. That's on you guys. It's not on me. And so the fact that he still has this like moral inkling in his mind that says, even with all the efforts I've put out, I still have the smarts and the cognizance to make a difference in this situation is significant enough that he will make the difference between them being able to bring everyone back or not is the impetus for him moving forward into the storyline, right? And how he has the whole situation where he goes, you know what, I have figured this out and I have a moral obligation to fulfill this because I have the knowledge of how to. So it's very good in regards to just developing his character into this. And frankly, I think that from a storytelling perspective, adding the daughter was just like an absolute genius move. Like, that is such an interesting addition to the whole storyline we didn't have before. One, the kid is so freaking adorable. I'm sorry, like the child actor is so good in the few scenes you see her that she's actually like, you don't want her to die. You don't want him to lose everything that he's gained in these 5 years. And so the fact that she needs to live is like a critical component to his life being makes total sense. And we buy into that like instantly in this storyline, right? And so like there's just so many things that they do with him that are so good, but also bringing back the aspect of his guilt around this protege of Spider-Man and trying to remember him and saying like I am also responsible in some ways for his death is like the catalyst to pull him back into the story in a real way. It's like it's so nuanced, it has so many conflicting opinions, but it's so good. Like of all of the characters in these films, I think that most people, if you were to just ask them on the street which one is the main character, would probably be Iron Man, simply because of how well they develop all of the dynamics around him. So I loved it, and he gets full kudos in my mind compared to anyone else in this film. He gets full kudos because they really just harp on all of his emotional strengths and just grind them into the dirt and say these are the core components. You have to deal with these tough situations and come to a conclusion and face them in the worst way possible. So, Andrew, what are your thoughts?
I mean, you covered most of it, to be honest. I will say a couple of things. So first, with Iron Man blaming Captain America, I don't think it's so much in relation to the idea of Ultron. It's in relation when you listen to the conversation. He says, "When we fought Ultron and I was trying to build a suit around the world, you said we would fight Thanos together." And it's like he's telling him, "You said your solution was we don't need protection, we just need each other." Well, guess what? He showed up and you weren't there. And so it's not that Ultron was a failure, it's that Iron Man stopped looking into these solutions because he rested in the assurance that regardless of what happened, their team would still reunite if the end of the world was approaching. And he had faith in his team. And he's saying, "I put my faith in you, and it cost us everything." And now I've gained that. And then when he comes back to him, he's like, "Now I've got everything. I've moved on. I don't want to go back," which is why Spider-Man's character dying in the last film is so crucial for his character arc, because he needs to have somebody that he feels compelled to go back and save. I think there's still an element of like he feels responsible for saving everyone else, but in his mind, Spider-Man was his child before he had his own daughter, right? He was this father figure that Peter Parker looked up to, wanted to be like, followed everywhere, even to the ends of space. And even though, right, Thanos' snap kills half the people, it doesn't really judge either or. It's very easy to get behind the idea that he still blames himself because Peter followed him there. And he watched Peter fade into nothingness in his own arms and had to sit there all by himself. So yeah, I think Iron Man's character is great. I think the fact that he dies is great because it's also a callback to the first movie when Iron Man tells Captain America, "Everything special about you came out of a bottle," and Captain America tells him, you're all these things, but you're not the guy to make the sacrifice play." Iron Man sacrifices himself. Captain America proves there's more things that are special about him than just the serum. But I think Iron Man's arc, right, beginning to end, you start with this character who's arrogant, narcissistic, egotistical. You have him transform from the first, second, and third movie. You have more transformations in the first Avengers, even though I think they're more minimal. You have major arc in Age of Ultron. You have his character in Civil War. You have his character even in Spider-Man Homecoming, which we've talked about. And then you get his character in Infinity War and Endgame. And so across all of these movies, I think they still do a good job of slowly taking his character from one end to the other. Because, right, he still is pretty egotistical, even like halfway through these movies. He still has an ego and is pretty full of himself, even if he's more selfless than selfish. And then by the end, he's willing to just, it's not even just a risk at that point, right? In the first Avengers, I'd make the argument it was more of a risk him shoving it up into the black hole. This one was a definitive, like, I know I'm going to die from this. And that eye contact he makes with Doctor Strange is kind of that moment where he's like, okay, this is it. Like, and in his mind too, he may want to spend his life with his daughter, but his daughter's life is more important than that to him. And so he's willing to give up everything for that.
Yeah, truly excellent. And they really harp on it too by the end, maybe to an excessive degree, depending on who you are, but like literally seeing every person's reaction to his funeral was, clearly trying to show the gravity of who he was as a character in the entire MCU and solidifying to us as audiences that like this was a big deal. And probably, hopefully, I mean, we'll see in Doomsday, but hopefully, like an actual like X marks the spot. This guy's gone.
Yeah, I mean, I think the funeral proves two things. One, I think it proves that he's the main character, right? They devote so much time to his character and I'm not talking about just Endgame. I think over the greater Marvel Cinematic Universe, especially the team up movies, I think he is the central focus. He gets a ton of screen time, a ton of development. A lot of the story arcs revolve around him or him and one other person. And then at the end, it's not only to the characters in the film. Iron Man was a big deal. They recognize that the people in that theater would be way more affected for Iron Man's death than even Black Widow's. And Black Widow's death still is an emotional moment, but Iron Man has this slow pan across every character who's been in the MCU pretty much up until that point. Even the little kid that he's with in Iron Man 3 is there as like this young adult / teenager standing in the crowd. So you've got all of these people he's interacted with. You have this long drawn out scene, even his death scene when they all kneel, just like, this is a fallen hero. This is someone who is worthy of our bending the knee right now. So yeah, I think it was great. I don't think it was too over the top, especially considering the fact that I think it was something that audiences probably wanted at the time too, considering this is a fan favorite character, someone that they've spent 10 years watching, right? You have a kid who started watching the Iron Man movies at like, let's say 10, 11 years old. He's like 20 years old now. So this is a character he's grown up with. It's a decade. So it's no small span of time.
Cool. I mean, we've dealt with a lot of characters at this point. We've dealt with most of the primary characters. I don't know if there's more side characters you want to discuss at this point that have relevance to the plot, because that's most of them. I mean, maybe Rocket.
I don't think Rocket has much of a character arc in this movie. He's there and he helps with certain other characters' stories, but he's not like a central character. Like they acknowledge the things he's been through, but he's not like a key driving character to the story. And like neither is really any of the other side characters. We could mention I mean Captain Marvel, most certainly not. You could I mean, I'm just like trying to think of other characters like War Machine, Nebula. I mean, they're just like they're there. They have interesting points of dialogue, but they're not like they don't drive the story of Endgame. So I mean, they're interesting, but they're not like. And I guess in some cases they're all trying to fix things. I mean, they're okay side characters, but they're not great side characters, I guess. But there's so much screen time in this movie anyway devoted to this who we have. It's not like, okay, we needed time with them. No, they were okay. So
sure.
It was good for what it was. So.
Right. Between having like 6 or 7 primary characters that they really try to delve deep in, and the fact that some of these fight scenes are just astronomically long, it's not like these other side characters need a ton of development. The main one really honestly is Nebula, and that's more so for the utility she has in regards to catalyzing Thanos's instigation into the plot, and that's more of a tool, if you will, than necessarily a unique storyline that develops her as a unique character. Unless you disagree, Andrew.
No, I think that Nebula, War Machine. Honestly, I'm like watching this and I'm going, why choose these characters? Honestly, I'm sitting there like they could have just rolled the dice and drawn straws and seen which characters survived through, because they don't. You could substitute almost any character in those roles. I think you probably still need one Guardian of the Galaxy. Rocket makes sense, right? Probably don't want Star-Lord there. I feel like Star-Lord being snapped off was a good play. Um, Nebula makes sense for how they want to drive the plot, so I don't think they switch anyone out for her. And then War Machine and, well, Ant-Man also another character that they needed in order to drive the plot forward. War Machine's the only one that I look at and go, I could probably be switched out for someone else, but I mean, he's been in the MCU so long, might as well just have him there. So it's like they wanted a handful of survivors to still be around, and so they just picked a couple that would work and kept them. And then most of those they had like plot specific reasons for keeping them rather than actually progressing their own individual stories.
So, with all of that fully gotten through, what are your guys' thoughts on the villain of the story? Let's talk about Thanos. We had a full-on discussion on him as a character in the previous film, and there was a lot of emphasis on him. Is he even the main character in the past film? And now we come to this one, where he's very much he has a different role in this one. What are your guys' thoughts on Thanos? Alan, if you want to go ahead, feel free.
I would say he's still a decent villain. I would say, in fact, I mean, maybe not as well developed as, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if he's as good a villain in this one as he is in the last one, as he does make some decisions I find questionable at certain points. But I mean, in terms of character, he's still a decent villain. He's not like any less of a villain this time around as he was the first in Infinity War. My main problem in terms of the story is just the scene in the past where Nebula shows up, like where Nebula has the like cross, like I don't know what to call it, the glitch with her past self, where like her memories become like intertwined with her past self, and suddenly Thanos realizes there's someone from the future in his timeline. Just because of how the events play out, I felt like Nebula could have gone back to the future, and there would have been no like it would fix everything in that moment. It was like, dude, like, why did you run back to that little pod thing? Like, he didn't necessarily know where Hawkeye and Black Widow are going. He doesn't even know about Vormir at this point. He doesn't have, as far as we know, he doesn't know the information of the Infinity Stones where they all are at. And so, like, her doing that stupid move was like, why was this written into the storyline? It makes zero sense. And it's just like, if she had done that, Thanos would have had zero influence on the plot, the storyline. Really?
You mean if she didn't go to Morag where
No,
Quill
if she had like, because literally after they get the Power Stone, War Machine hits the thing and disappears back to the future, and she's about to when she glitches out, collapses, and then you see that they're hacking, like they see the memory of Thanos getting killed after beating, and it's like getting killed after having used the Infinity Gauntlet. And so she's aware that they've seen that scene because she just relived it. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like we're not given enough information in that scene. It's like she literally was just about to go back to the future. Like that would have been more motive for her to go back to the future at that point. I feel like it wasn't like there was zero reason in that moment. And so like part of my problem with this movie is that particular scene where it's like, you could have fixed so many future scenarios by just going back, by activating the time travel device. And I was just like, I got so freaking annoyed with that scene watching it this time around. And I just was like, this is like a story flub on so many levels for me. I just got, I don't know. I was watching with one of my brothers too at the time, and we were just like, what the actual heck? It just.
Yeah.
So I mean, and I guess in terms of the story of this movie, it's just like because I see this more as a storyline for their characters. Like, I mean, because the reality is of the themes and messages, it's like it's characters who have failed, like learning to move on and to resolve the pain of their past. So it's like that is really the storyline of Endgame. They just had to bring Thanos in for a galactic battle and to bring about to have this big finale, more or less, for this particular movie. Which in terms of the overarching character arcs of the MCU makes sense, but in terms of Endgame itself, doesn't. Is what I'd argue. It's just like...
Well, it's It's interesting because it's like in previous films, right? We have seen almost a overemphasis, at least in my opinion, on the story they're trying to tell to the detriment of the development of the characters. And in this case, there's a sense in which they reverse that, where they develop so much on the character development, which in some ways I gave accolades for. I mean, I fawned over Iron Man and Captain America and all these other characters, and even Thor to some degree, and said, wow, you guys did really good in regards to developing these characters. But in the case of the storyline itself, they somewhat shoehorned some of this in by saying, okay, this is the story you want to tell, make it happen. And there we go. This is what's going to happen in this story. So yeah, the fact that she has Pym particles and they steal them from her, so she clearly has them, and goes, nah, I'm actually just gonna let myself get captured more or less because I'm terrified about what the heck's going to happen, didn't really make a ton of sense from a storyline perspective. Andrew, I don't know if you have more to add on Nebula there.
I feel like this conversation is getting into the topic of where Marvel fumbles. So if we're going that route, I have a lot to say. Otherwise, I don't have much to add on Nebula.
Well, I think the full-on fumble we'll get to once we get into the time travel thing. So if you have that,
think that's the biggest fumble, to be honest. But I agree, it's massive. I think this movie does so much wrong.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, with all that background, I feel like it's worth having a full discussion on Thanos because it's very different, the Thanos we see in this version versus the Thanos we see in the previous one. Because the previous Thanos had so many things that he was struggling with, dealing with, really trying to achieve his own goals, which were malicious, but were interesting and intriguing. He had all these values he was driving towards and all of these internal struggles and all of that he sacrificed to achieve his malicious ends, right? In this case, he takes a very different route, especially once he sees that visual recollection of the Nebula that he has, right? Where he sees that there is a future version of Nebula and that he sees that he achieves his goals in this at least alternate universe, right? And at that point, he switches to this mantra that he states 3 or 4 times in the film where he goes, I am inevitable, right? He believes he is destined to achieve the goal that he has set out to achieve, which is to destroy half of humanity and all of that exists. What are you guys' thoughts on Thanos in this film? Do you think he is compelling in this film? Do you think he's not? What are your thoughts, Avalon?
I think he's still an interesting character, but I don't know if he's as developed in this movie as he is in Infinity War. I would almost argue that he becomes a little bit more stock in this movie than he did in the prior movie, where it's he starts to take on a little bit more of the bad guy-esque feel, where it's oh, now I must destroy all of you because clearly you guys can't accept what I've done. It was almost he starts to become this monologuing villain more or less, and just as I just see some of his actions where it's I mean it's not bad. His character's not bad in this movie. It's and he's not completely stock. It's just he takes elements that I feel are stock and adds them to his character. So that's what I don't know how to describe it other than that, where it's he doesn't feel as fully developed this time around as he did in the last in Infinity War. So that's all I was just trying to say.
Sure. Andrew, do you have additional thoughts to add to that?
I think Thanos is stupid in this movie, and for one reason. Thanos in Infinity War, just hear me out here. Why does he do what he does? This is key in understanding his character. He has this goal to wipe out half of life in the universe. Why? Because he sees it as the only way to preserve life, which means his end goal is still to preserve life. It's always been his goal. He just sees no other way to do it other than to wipe out half of existence so that they don't end up consuming themselves, essentially. In this film, he says, you know what? I couldn't succeed last time, so this time I'm just going to kill everyone, which is not a reasonable conclusion for his character to come to if his goal has always been to make sure that humanity persists. He tells the Avengers, I'm just going to kill the other half now too. And so it's it goes back to what Avalon said about making him feel stock. I think they just stripped his whole character of what made him interesting to begin with, is that he has a noble desire in the first film. he wants something noble, but the way he goes about it is to exterminate half of all life, which is, to any reasonable and rational human watching this movie, a bad thing. In this film, he just sounds like someone who's pissed off and triggered by the Avengers trying to stop him, which in the first film, right? He literally tells them, I expect you to fight back. I expect nothing less. He says this in so many words, on several occasions when confronting different characters. In this film, it's like he gets pissed off that they're fighting back. Why would you do that? You idiots. How dare you? He just turns into like this narcissistic character on an ego trip who's just like, you know what? Fine. I'm turning into Uriah, kill everyone. And that's how that's how his character develops in this film. And I'm just like,
this podcast is gonna know that reference.
That's the fun. You guys left. My joke works.
Goodness.
Uriah is my brother who will just suicide into you if he's losing a game. So, anyways,
yeah,
it
doesn't matter the game. It could be Risk, it could be Twilight Imperium, it could be the game of life. I don't care. If Uriah gets triggered by something, he will make your life a living hell for the rest of that game. And it's fine. And there's not really any rhyme or reason to it. It could just be that Maverick has been brown-nosing for most of the game, and now Uriah's decided on someone else, or maybe he just hates D'Artagnan. Anyways, my point is, he becomes an irrational actor by the end of the film, where he just gets so upset that his plans didn't work that he devolves. And the thing that makes him interesting is he's always calm and collected in the first film, no matter what happens. It's like he just accepts the reality of it and keeps moving forward anyways. But we get this younger version of him who's like, nope, we're just going to kill everyone. And you could make the argument that he's younger, therefore he's not going to have the same rationale. But this Thanos is the Thanos that exists like during the first Avengers movie, based on the timeline we're given. And so he's been planning this for over a decade. And the Mad Titan isn't going to have a normal lifespan either. Like, I was really frustrated with rewatching this and actually thinking through why Thanos is acting the way he is. It felt like they just wanted to have this epic endgame battle where the Avengers stand up against Thanos' armies, and Thanos is a Giga Chad with his epic sword, none of the Infinity Stones, mind you, and still 1v3s the three main Avengers being Cap, Iron Man, and Thor, and just beats them to a pulp. Like, it felt like Thor Ragnarok, where you have the movie built around a fight scene, and you just want to see Hulk and Thor duke it out. They just wanted to see the Avengers fight Thanos again. And it was like, okay, well, the movie, in my mind, in terms of the plot, falls apart once we get to that final battle and you actually get Thanos confronting them.
Yeah, well, and I think that there's two things to that. The one part, which I'm curious to hear your thoughts at, but I'll retroactively get to it in regards to how he's presented. In regards to just the fight scenes, I 100% agree that they just wanted to see you not even mono, just like the team versus Thanos again. And anytime you see someone come back to fight their enemy, there's almost like an assumption that they've grown and risen to the level of their enemy and they're going to win. And so, unless you add a unique dynamic to the scenario, I think it's less, for us as an audience, there's less uncertainty in regards to his character to be sure that he's going to that the heroes are going to succeed or not, right? The fact that it's like, oh, the heroes fight the enemy and then lose. And then they come back and fight him again, bigger, better, stronger, wiser. Who's going to win now? Probably the heroes, right? That's just inherently how we understand storylines to go. And so the idea that you want us to still have some shadow of a doubt that they might actually lose, you need to add a dynamic to that scenario that makes us actually question, oh, now this new thing was added. Who knows what will happen in the end? And they didn't really do that in this film. I think maybe you could make the argument they're trying to with the time travel thing. I call BS on that, but maybe that's what they were trying to go for. And frankly, yes, it was definitely for the fight scene, because that fight scene went on for like 30 minutes. So you know that everyone got the screen time that they wanted to give them in that fight scene to show this massive, epic, super awesome fight, which was a bunch of crap. Anyways, in regards to Thanos, kind of trying to push back, now that I'm playing both sides, saying, yes, you're right, but also you might be wrong. In regards to, you saying that he's basically just this immature version of Thanos that wants to do whatever he wills because he's like, oh, I am so powerful and so awesome, blah, blah, blah. You still get the sense that he's a stoic, collected individual, even in these preceding fight scenes, right? Where the lines that he's giving are not ones of someone who's like totally, oh, I'm just so arrogant AF. He's actually giving the same similar lines you get in the first one, where he says, everyone dies for the noble cause, willing in the last moments of their life, they still thought what they were fighting for was just, right? That's like the first line he gives at the beginning of Infinity War. And you get the same kind of mantra in this film, where he's saying consistently, I am inevitable. And even like in the small things that he does, where they're fighting the Avengers and they have that epic one side versus the other, he doesn't even say anything. He just raises his sword, telling his soldiers, go out and fight him, That it seems like he's just this stoic leader who's pushing them forward in their path, which seems to indicate he's the same character, don't you think? I mean, I don't know that anything that I saw necessarily in regards to his words or actions indicated he was any different per se than the character we saw in the first film.
I'm not saying the way he presents. I'm saying the actions and the conclusions he comes to are not the actions and conclusions or the decisions and conclusions that the Thanos we got in the first movie would have come to, because his desire in the first movie, again, is to preserve life. It's just he has to take half of it in order to do that. But at the core of his belief is this idea that humanity and life must persist. If he didn't care about life, he wouldn't bother, because it doesn't matter. If he doesn't care if it lives or dies, why intervene at all? Because in his mind, they're just going to die anyways. He's intervening because he thinks they need a savior. In this film, it's no longer about preserving life. He wants mass extinction for all life. And he says that in the final fight. It's just like, I guess I'm just back to finish the job now. And so I'm going to start with your pitiful planet, basically. And it's like, it goes against everything that Thanos stood for at the very foundation of his beliefs.
I think I could,
like, I don't get me wrong. I can get behind him saying, I'm going to kill the Avengers, right? That is more plausible in my mind than him going, humanity will always find a way to fight back, therefore I must kill them. I think that's exactly what Thanos wanted in the first movie, is humanity to find a way to survive. He assumes they will find a way to survive. And like, he's done this in the past, right? He's wiped out half of life on multiple planets. You see that in the flashback we have in Infinity War with Thanos and Gamora, when he ends up killed, like, her mom gets shot execution style. But the fact that now he's upset that they're finding a way to survive and trying to bring people back is like, I just don't buy it for the character we're given in the first film. And it feels like a regression or even just a degression of his character.
I don't know that I necessarily agree. I think that my overall take on Thanos is a little more basic and overarching in regards to like our psychological impression of him, in that he is developed so strongly in the first film, right? That it spends so much time on him and who he is and why he's doing what he's doing, that makes him just inherently intriguing as a villain, that they take him in this film and just do nothing with him, right? They don't develop him at all. They don't really change who he is as a person, and they don't even like try to push him forward into the goals that he has in the original film, right? Because like you said, this is the past for him. So if he's fulfilling the goals that he has in his future self, you should see him progressing into that future self. In this case, you see him basically get this mantra of I am inevitable, and then repeat that throughout the rest of the film. And so it turns him into this stock character. And so from a basic understanding of who he is as a person, we don't see anything, at best, a regression to a more basic form of a villain in this character than anything else. And so I think from an emotional standpoint, it is far from fulfilling, just because you don't get anything from him compared to what you got previously. Because you would hope, right, if you saw Ultron return, you would see him struggling with his failure, in the past film, and developing from that and trying to figure out how to be this philosophical robotic genius while also trying to fight the Avengers in a new way, right? Or something like that. Or Loki in his constant iterations that he goes through. At least he has some development as he learns to grapple with the different aspects and dynamics of what it means to be a villain or a hero, right? And all of these different dynamics that you see with other villains, you would see this idea that they at least progress in their story and their understanding and their development and their arc. And Thanos, you just don't get that in this film. So I think that as a baseline makes him uncompelling for us as audiences. Anyways, we've talked a lot about that. We've developed most of the story at this point. I mean, if you haven't gotten the tidbits more or less, they go back in time, they get all of Infinity Stones, and then they have this they have this massive fight, this humongous fight for this 3-hour long film where, a third of it or a sixth of it or whatever is just this one fight between one side versus the other. It's supposed to be massively epic, and then all the fallout as people die and whatnot. The main things I think are worth discussing are: 1, do we think this is satisfying? 2, the lasting impact of this film, and 3, the serious plot holes that do exist in this film, because we haven't really discussed those at this point, but they definitely deserve a good mention. So let's talk about that third one now. Let's start with the one that is the glaring hole we have all at least hinted at, and that is of time travel. Avalon, you want to start us off on this? What are your thoughts?
I've seen others. I like other time travels. I like certain time travel stories, just not in Endgame.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say. I mean, I feel like that's all I can really say, because it's like, you could hash it out more, but it's like, we've already been discussing this movie for 2 hours now, so it's like, okay, but what more?
Sure.
Well, I think so. I think we all agree that it's a terrible part of this movie.
Yeah, and I think there are some instances where I think would deserve an intriguing dialogue. Unfortunately, the most of the examples I think of, such as Steins Gate, are TV shows, and we don't deal with TV shows in this, podcast. So sorry, everyone, you're not going to get that here. But in regards to the instances of time travel, I think that there is inherently a lot of struggles you have to deal with in regards to what does it mean in the continuity of the timeline. And I felt like there was a couple instances, like you said, they were trying to go back to those initial instigating instances for some of these characters, or to recollect things in the past, right? If you want to deal with Captain America specifically, right? That's a big part of his arc by the end of the film. So they clearly wanted to go to that to some degree, and that's part of the reason they chose that. Part of this is also that, frankly, this kind of harkens back to a classic Disney thing where they just don't want characters to die. And ironically enough, I think this would have been a great area for them to do the reset that they're kind of trying to do now, where they want to start out with a new group of characters to be the leaders in the multiverse, or in the universe of the Marvel Studios, right, that they have created. But in the instances that we are now left with, they are dealing with it in a piecemeal approach, right, where they have this person rise up to be Captain America, and this person rise up to be Hawkeye, and this person rise up to be the new Black Widow. All of these characters are coming up as a new instance of that on a piecemeal basis, rather than having this blank slate they would have created with Infinity War, where they had these new characters who are all gone in an instant, and they have to grapple with that fact and step forward into that reality, trying to deal with the future as it is, right? Rather than going back to this instance of what was. And Marvel's reaction was, nah, we like all these characters too much. We can make some good money if we just bring these characters back to life. I know what we're going to do. Time travel. How are we going to do this? Well, we're going to take quantum physics and say this random quantum physics thing is just going to make sense because we say it does, and have our freaking friendly neighborhood Ant-Man come in and just solve the problem by just appearing out of nowhere. And hence, solution. We have our money-making machine. We have all these other characters we can still use, and we can still have the other arc we plan to deal with all along this entire time. So, I see in some ways they were pushing toward this for a while, so it's not inherently disqualifying for characters such as Iron Man and how they fully develop that. But at the same time, I think that it led a lot more questions than answers. And specifically because the plot line they say for time travel at the beginning, I don't think was bad. In that they said at the beginning with the Incredible Hulk, oh, you can't just, go back and interact with people in the past who are yourself and other things like that because you're going to create brand new branching timelines and that's not okay. So don't interact with other characters of yourself or other versions of yourself in the past because that's not cool and that's going to cause problems. But if we put everything back the way it was, it'll be perfectly fine. Newsflash, they all basically interact with versions of characters they shouldn't have interacted with in the past anyways, and yet that doesn't seem to cause a problem in their timeline. So I think that it was like they set up rules for how timeline works and then proceeded to like violate their own rules. And then not only did those not work, but yeah, there was no consequences for that. And also there was just like, it just turned out to be incredibly convenient for everyone in the end result. Right. So those are my general thoughts, and they're a little jarbled, I will admit. I don't know.
The other thing,
the
other thing about this whole time travel thing is it's like it feels like they just they set things up and then just like forget about it or decide not to do anything with it. I literally had something on the front of my mind which you just mentioned, and it just was like it just thoroughly annoyed me because it's like there are just several points in the past where they do something and like could have led to something great or indicated something or another, and then it's like for even future movies or future storytelling, and it's just like and then they walk it back. Mm-hmm. I had something in front of my mind and I've completely forgotten it. But the other thing that comes to mind is the line where the Hulk is talking to the old ancient one, and she mentions how Doctor Strange is supposed to be the best of them all as far as the sorcerers go, and it's just like that line feels it like a lie now because of Multiverse of Madness, and I don't know. It just feels like this movie like was trying to like saying these things and doing things in the past, and there's several scenes in the past that just thoroughly annoyed me now watching it this time around, and I'm just like,
yeah, well,
it was a major one, and now I can't remember what it is. I'm now annoyed I can't remember it.
Sure. I mean, I think the Thor one, maybe you can give some credence to that because his mom's like, shut up, don't tell me what's going to happen. Sure, well, maybe. I think with the...
that particular scene would have had more impact if he took the reins of being king at the very end of the movie. Well, like, it would have made so much more. Yeah. That one, they literally just messed up in the same movie. That doesn't even deal with future movies. So
Sure. In regards to Thor's arc, garbage. In regards to, like, the continuity of their time travel thing, it's passable, I think, if you will. Right. In regards to, let's just say, the Iron Man situation with the Tesseract, right? You have him steal it get taken by Loki, and then he goes back further in time to steal it earlier, and then supposedly puts it back when he deals with his dad and whatnot, right? Sure. Maybe, I'm not entirely recollecting this fully, but maybe they deal with that in Ragnarok when Loki interacts with Thor. I didn't really recall the Tesseract showing up at that point. But at that point, the fact is that the Tesseract is now canon to have been stolen by Loki at that point in history because that's what happens. Loki steals it and then disappears into the ether of nothingness, right? And then beyond that, you also have the idea of you shouldn't interact with your own individual characters. And then you have Captain America interacting with himself and fighting himself to get the scepter, right? And so each of those three different instances are instances that are like, these should not happen, and they happened. What is the result of that? The result of that is nothing. Nothing happens. And so this big dread you built at the beginning of saying something bad will happen if these things occur doesn't happen. And as a result, you're just sitting there going like, okay, so there is no real consequences to you going back and doing anything in time travel because you can just basically retcon it for your own purposes, for your own pleasure, to make things work the way you want it to. Yay.
Well, there is
so much for time travel having a reasonable cohesiveness.
There is an explanation, but I absolutely hate the explanation. And that explanation is the TVA. Because of the Loki show. It's just like, you literally just created a Deus Ex Machina to fix everything. It's like, oh, they broke the rules, but there was a reason that there was no consequences because the TVA cleaned it all up. It's like, no, that's not how storytelling works. You need characters to suffer the consequences of their actions, otherwise they don't learn. Otherwise they don't change as people. Or they don't, it's like, it's, uh, in terms of storytelling, you don't take away the consequences of a character's action because then you make the story less satisfying. It doesn't follow from their actions, the story. It's
Andrew, did you have thoughts on this or on other aspects that are absolute failures in regards to the cohesiveness of this plot?
So you guys have covered time travel pretty well. I think the TVA existing is like, yeah, it's problematic. I think it also just doesn't come into play in this film. We don't know it exists. So I think even for the greater MCU of phases 1 through 3, it's not even considered as an option.
Yeah. Well, when I wrote my review, I didn't even consider the TVA. I just mentioned it as an explanation.
Yeah.
It's just like
so you guys have covered time travel. I think this film sets hear me out here because I was scratching my head over this for a while. I think this film sets itself up for failure by having Thanos be the Thanos that time traveled and killing him off early in the film. I think the Thanos they bring back ends up being simplistic. He ends up being a basic villain. And I think that they also, by using time travel and bringing everyone back, is the biggest fumble the MCU has had so far. I think all those characters needed to stay dead. I think the lack of closure we get with some of them would have been so impactful, and we can still get other versions of those characters through the multiverse, right? There are so many different versions of the characters that we saw die off that we could play with later. And like with Captain America being gone, we could have just had another multiverse where we have, say, Bucky Barnes is now Captain America. And we don't have a Winter Soldier in this universe anymore. So we just have this Winter Soldier over here. And you have a completely different story you can play with there now, because this Bucky could be someone who has already gone through the loss of Captain America and is struggling to carry on this legacy in his own world, right? You also have the ability to bring in new characters like the Fantastic Four, like the X-Men, like the Inhumans, and then all of their storylines that they play with. I also think that the end credit scene of this film should have had Doctor Doom in it. I think they should have been playing with Doom from the beginning here, and I think that they lost their momentum with this film because they were so caught up in making sure they brought everyone back and had this climactic moment, and they were looking forward to Endgame for so long that they allowed themselves to almost hit the brakes once they made this film. And they did not continue that forward thinking they had from Iron Man and all through phases 1 and 3 to continue even in Endgame, because what they needed to do is set up the rest of the phases in this film. And I talked to Sean about this. How do they set up Doctor Doom, right? Here's how you do it. Sokovia ends up becoming Latveria. Doctor Doom is a character that has already exists. Maybe he was younger, or maybe we just get a Doctor Doom from a different universe. But I think it would have been perfect to have Doctor Doom be the character who's in the shadows in this film. And there's just an end credit scene with him like showing him amassing power to himself in the aftermath of this battle. In the aftermath of a world that is broken, half of life has been wiped off the face of the earth, and now you've set up this new villain. And you move forward with that, right? I think you still keep Thanos as the villain. I just think it needs to be the Thanos from the first movie, because I think that Thanos was developed much more. You had a lot more emotional weight to him. And maybe it's something along the lines of he doesn't want to kill all of life, but the Avengers won't stop looking for him. They won't stop trying to find a solution to this problem. And so what Thanos ends up doing is he has to confront them, because he can't continue to live in a world where they're constantly trying to bring everyone back. I find the idea of him destroying the stones, using the stones to destroy the stones, to be lazy because they just wanted to get rid of them and they needed time travel. This could just be me rambling, right? This is the thoughts I put together in like 2 hours. I just think that my primary takeaway is the fact that they bring everyone back. I absolutely abhor the fact that they did this. And I think that all of the weight they had and everything they did with those characters that they killed off, all the characters they still had could have had the arcs that they did without bringing those characters back. And you would have opened yourself up to so many different storylines. I think Hulk You could have set up a very interesting story for Hulk. Instead of him being smart Hulk, you could set up World War Hulk for a later phase, right? And made Hulk this major antagonist that the Illuminati has to deal with. And guess what? Maybe the Illuminati forms because of someone like Thanos, and you get these different characters that are now introduced, like Mr. Fantastic. You have maybe you have a different version of Doctor Strange that shows up. Does that make sense to you guys? I don't know if I'm just rambling at this point.
Sure. I mean, like, I think the options are intriguing, and I will see if any of them are even used in future films. But I think the important point that you brought up that has relevance for this film specifically is that they were building up to this entire time, right? And that you can see how all of these previous films were in some ways hinting at this more and more strongly until you actually got to this moment. And so they were building up to this, and this was the pinnacle. And once they hit this, they didn't really know where they were going after that. And so when they finished this arc, everyone's like, oh my goodness, that was incredible. Look what happened to Iron Man. Look what happened to Captain America. Look what happened to Black Widow. That was crazy, right? And so even just recollecting back when it came out, just talking to people, everyone was like, wow, that was amazing. That was incredible. That was so good, blah, blah, blah. And they were all bought into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Everyone wanted to see what happens next. The problem is that to some degree, Marvel Studios wanted to know what happens next because they didn't know, because they just kind of had this whole plan built out. And once the plan finished, they still wanted to do things with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but they didn't know what. And so because they weren't building beyond that, they ended up taking this piecemeal approach and trying to recobble together things in a haphazard way with writers that were subpar compared to the ones they had previously. And so what they built into was something that was far less desirable than what we had coming up to this point. And that is the biggest lackluster part of all of this, is while I can even look at this and say, sure, they did not end it well. At the same time, there are some things about how they ended this film that I thought I really appreciated, right? Iron Man, Captain America, as we discussed previously, those were not bad endings. They were fantastic endings. And for all of the ways that they've dealt with characters and the fact that they completed their stories in that way, I appreciate it. I liked it. I would love to see more of that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But they just don't know what they're doing anymore. And so now we're just sitting here going, I don't even know if I want to watch the next movie. I certainly didn't really appreciate watching Fantastic Four, as we discussed when it came out. So, why would I be invested in Doomsday? Because for all I know, it's going to be a TikTok franchise that they're going to try to make happy-go-lucky for 10 minutes every time they show a new character. I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I don't expect much.
Yeah. I think the other thing, right, is Marvel had an opportunity to take a much darker tone with the MCU, at least for the next 1, 2, maybe 3 phases. Because up until this point, it's had a pretty light tone. And then you get Infinity War, which was just this massive shift with killing half of the universe. And you could have had, say, the actual Thunderbolts play a pretty major role in the MCU now as the new Avengers, but the much darker version of them, right? And you could introduce characters that way. You could play with the Midnight Suns. It's just the possibilities there are endless, but Marvel they don't know what to do. And so they're scrambling and going, well, what worked before? Iron Man. So clearly we need another Iron Man. Let's do Ironheart. Okay, that didn't work. What are we going to do? We might as well just bring him back in Doomsday at this point. We need a new Captain America. Who we're going to give it to? Falcon. Let's give it to him. Okay, clearly that's not doing very well. We need a new Hulk. She-Hulk. Oh, wow. Let's forget that ever existed. We need a new Hawkeye. Kate Bishop. Wow. Does anybody remember the Hawkeye show at this point? I don't know. We need a new, who else was there? Ant-Man, we've got Cassie Lang. We need a new Black Widow, we've got Yelena Belova. We need a new Thor. Oh, wait, no, we don't, actually. He's just retarded now. So, they had all this momentum, hit the brakes, didn't know what to do. Now they're just desperately calling back to these characters that had definitive arcs in the first 3 phases of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Good arcs, mind you, right? We've talked about Iron Man. We've talked about Thor. We've talked about Captain America. All of these characters had satisfactory endings, but they're not letting them rest as characters and just pick up new ones like they did when they introduced these characters. And they have so many characters to play with. Marvel has, I don't know the exact number, but it's a lot. All right, like it is one of the biggest universes in terms of just the sheer number of heroes that you can play with. And we're just not getting that. And it's like, I think that's another thing that audiences are probably getting bored with at this point, is like, we want new characters. The people, the kids that are watching these movies now didn't grow up with Iron Man or Captain America at this point. They need to pick new characters. And like, when I say new, I mean actually new characters, not characters that are constantly calling back to ones that we knew before. Because guess what? The only way that works is if you're calling back to them in relation to an audience that cares about that character. You get these younger kids who are watching this. Okay, Iron Man, they haven't seen all, 20, 30 movies that were building up the MCU at that point. You need to start fresh, and you can use the pieces that were left over there, right? Endgame still leaves you a ton of stuff to work with moving forward. But yeah, anyways, I at this point I'm just rambling. I think I've gotten my point across.
Yeah, well, and even beyond that, I think that to even play the devil's advocate, it's not that these other characters necessarily are inherently bad, right? Kate Bishop or Ironheart or whatever have you. It's that I mean, I personally think that Marvel has gotten lazy in regards to their storytelling, and the characters that they do have there, they're just not trying like they initially did. Because you inherently know, if you're giving us a new character, you need to make that character compelling. And that's what at least they tried very hard to do at the very beginning with Iron Man, with Captain America, with all of these characters that we were first introduced to. They really just dug in and tried to develop a compelling backstory for them to understand why they exist and why we need them in our world today. And these new characters is just like, oh, you all know superheroes. Superheroes are great. We all want superheroes in our world. Let's just have a female Iron Man. Oh, let's just have Hawkeye give his bow to this other random lady and make her be the new Hawkeye, right? And yada, yada, yada. That's what you get. And so it's not so much building a character that is compelling inherently, but they're just taking the pieces and assuming that those backgrounds are inherently compelling when they're not.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyways.
No, I agree. The writing has gotten downhill after Endgame. It kind of actually started at Endgame, but it was like, as Andrew said, it was a foreshadow of things to come. The only thing I'll say in defense of bringing people back is because this Infinity War and Endgame is loosely based on the Infinity Gauntlet comics. So, I mean, obviously they were trying to figure out a way to bring the people back, as they did in the comics, some way, somehow. So that's the only defense I would give of that particular story point. But otherwise, I agree with you.
Yeah.
So
no, I get it. Right there, they still need to follow the comics somewhat. I think they're like, I still think there's some level of creative liberty they can take, because if it's truly just an exact shot for shot recreation,
there should have been more consequences for bringing the people back.
Yeah,
what we saw.
I agree.
In the context of this movie specifically, not outside of it in other media.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, even like super compelling characters, if you want to get into like Andrew's world on who you could make compelling, they have taken characters that were, one, inherently interesting in, let's just say, the Infinity Gauntlet series, and then completely botched them. You know, if you want to talk about Adam Warlock, right? Who was like a huge character in the freaking Infinity Gauntlet series, and he was like the main dude, and he's incredibly powerful. And what is he? Some freaking loser in the Guardians of the Galaxy universe, where he's just like, oh, mummy, what should I do? Okay, I'm going to kill this person.
Well, also, what's insane is that they set up his character at the end of Guardians 2. We were wrong, honestly, in Endgame, because his character was set up, and they instead went, nope, we're going to put Captain Marvel and make her insanely goated in this movie. And it's like, Black Widow was more of a girl boss than you, and she doesn't have half the power you do. Yeah. I think there's not just, by the way, Adam Warlock. I think there's been multiple characters that have great potential that we've just not seen, right? Eternals, we got Black Knight, and we got Blade in the background. Haven't seen anything of them yet. We got that end credit scene with Vulture. Granted, Vulture's a villain, so it's a little different, but right, those are three right there, right? Moon Knight, by the way, Moon Knight, Blade, and Black Knight are all characters that would work really, really well in like Midnight Suns. So, like, anyways, point taken.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think at this point we're just like,
Yeah,
we're
we're just
going the review part. And we're just like,
yeah, we're rambling on the failures of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and in some ways we are talking about the lasting impact of it and just discussing that and how you know, they had such a good thing going and it kind of climaxed in this film and they didn't know where they were going from there, and that pretty much sums up a lot of what we end up getting from the Endgame movie.
in a way, Endgame was a finale for most audiences, so they didn't feel the need to continue on with the rest of the MCU. So, like, in fact, things were just bad afterwards, just helped people to drop it. So, I mean, it's that is kind of the lasting impact of Endgame. It kind of killed the rest of the MCU.
Hey, fair enough.
I think a lot of people would be willing to like look at Endgame and say, like, in their mind, that's the end of the MCU for them. It's fine to just put a book on that and say, all right, end of story. Bye-bye.
Yeah. They brought back half the life of the universe just to lose the audience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Absolute trash, bruh.
Nice. Well, is there any final parting thoughts you guys think about for this film? Anything that you think should be recollected? Would you change your rating? What are you guys' final thoughts? Go ahead, Avalon.
Review of Endgame specifically might go up a little bit because I realized I was a little harsh on certain points because you guys gave it a higher review score than I did. And looking at some of my points, I'm like, well, maybe I'd give it. I was a little harsher on that than I needed to be, so maybe I'd raise it from a 4.4 to a 5. But because I was a little harsh on some points. As I said, this is for Endgame specifically. My review for Avengers overall, like all the character arcs, is like a 7.05 because I see the MCU, especially the Avengers films, more not like Lord of the Rings or like a continuous story across all of them. I see them as individual stories where character arcs encompass all of them, more like How to Train Your Dragon or the Dark Knight trilogy, where like they're individual stories, but they're character arcs that encompass all of them. So I think the character arcs across all of the movies is good, but the individual movies vary in terms of how good they are with their individual stories. So that's all I would say, because I don't know if that's been clear in my reviews of Avengers. So
sure. And I think that this brought a lot of them to a conclusion in a way that was pretty satisfying. So in spite of some of our critiques of the last one or some of the previous ones, I think that they did do well at rounding those out in this film and bringing some of those to a satisfying conclusion in a way that many people probably would agree.
I think my overall rating for this film, because I used the 9 points to rate the entirety of phases 1 through 3, I ended up giving like a 7.6. I think overall, if you take this as one massive cohesive story, there's a really good narrative there, especially seeing as Endgame is the conclusion to a lot of those arcs. And I think Endgame, in a lot of ways, is essential for these 3 phases to succeed in the ways that I think it does by the end. There are some flops in these first 3 phases, right? I don't think Hulk's that compelling. Thor: The Dark World's not that great. Iron Man 2 is not amazing, but like you have a lot of really good movies in here. My favorite Marvel movies are in the first 3 phases, right? You have Captain America: Civil War, you've got Captain America: Winter Soldier, you've got Avengers: Age of Ultron. These are phenomenal within their own universe, and I would put movies like Captain America: Winter Soldier up there in like my top 10 movies of all time. I think it's truly an amazing movie, and we've talked about it on the podcast. So I think overall the first 3 phases are great. I think if we were ending with Endgame, we would be fine. But I think the fact that we want to make more movies and aren't setting those up is where the major downfall of the MCU comes in.
Yeah. And that's what you see with most of the reviews we've given for films past this. So
Yeah, and right. I mean, even
That's
if
what you
you think about it, right? Think about the reviews that we've been giving. Me and Avalon, we gave a review in which we include all of the different films because they are interconnected and they work well when you view them as being interconnected. When you take the movies post Phase 3, they don't function well in a cohesive way, and they don't function well as individual films either. And I think, like, right when we compare the movies in the MCU, like Infinity War, as a standalone film, it doesn't do as well. When you compare it as a film that's building on a cohesive narrative, it does much better. But when you take films, you make them similar to how you're making, say, movies like Infinity War or Endgame. Maybe not Endgame, but like Infinity War and other Marvel movies that have team ups. But then you don't tie them together. Now you've lost the thing that made phases 1 through 3 compelling.
right, and at least in a way that everyone is excited to watch all of the cinema that you've been releasing at this point.
Yeah.
So that's what you get going forward, which is why I don't care about the next TV show that Marvel releases, and most people that I'm talking to aren't following it like they used to. And, that's unfortunate, but that's the state of the MCU as we see it today. So that's what you got. And I think that's probably a good place to end it. So that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We'll be back as we always are next week. We'll see you all then.